compassionate are you? Is your compassion conditional? Let me tell you the story of my friend Kenny. Kenny was born poor in rural West Virginia. Early into his education, it was found that he had an exceptionally low IQ. He was often made fun of and beaten up by other children. After several skirmishes with other children, Kenny's mother took him out of school. As Kenny matured physically, he mentally stayed about 13 years old. When he was 27, Kenny fell in love. She was a pretty brunette lady. One night, in an effort to court her, Kenny went to her house. She probably felt pity for him, so she allowed it. Now at this moment, you may feel compassion for Kenny. After all, Kenny is a product of circumstance. He, through no fault of his own, had lived a difficult life. Now, what if I told you that after she rebuffed his attempts to kiss her, Kenny, now about 6'3", pinned her down and raped her? She screamed, and Kenny choked her in order to stop her from screaming. And he stopped her from breathing. Kenny was sentenced to life in prison for first-degree murder. When I met Kenny, he was about 50 years old. And in the time that I followed his illness, I watched dementia steal his gentle giant personality. Soon he became aggressive and had to be medicated until his death, alone in a cell. Does Kenny, a murderer and rapist, deserve your compassion? Some of you may be saying yes, but consider that may be because I just told you his story. Had I said, I know this guy Kenny, he's a rapist and murderer, he died alone in prison, would you have cared? Would it have made a difference? Would it have met the threshold of your compassion asterisk? Today, I want to challenge you. When I say the words compassion, what do you think of? Gandhi? Mother Teresa? Let's take it one step further. To whom do you show compassion? The poor? The homeless? We like to think of ourselves as compassionate people. However, I would posit that unintentionally, there's an asterisk behind the word. We are compassionate to those society tells us deserve it. We are compassionate to those who make us look good in front of our friends, family, clergy, community. But are we truly compassionate without the asterisk? There's a movement in the prisons right now that started with hospice. Many of you are aware of the concept of hospice. It is provided care for those who have been diagnosed with 6 months or less to live. It promotes the ideology that no one should die alone. It is compassion personified and amplified. But what about Kenny and the millions of other people who are incarcerated? Do they deserve our compassion? Some would say no. But if that is the case, then we have to acknowledge the asterisk and that we may not be the society that we fancy ourselves to be. Howard Zinn once said, "I am convinced that imprisonment is a way of pretending to solve the problem of crime. It does nothing for the victims of crime, but it promotes the perpetuation of the idea of retribution, thus maintaining the endless cycle of violence in our culture. It is a cruel and useless substitute for those elements: unemployment, poverty, homelessness, greed. that are often at the root of most punished crime. It indeed must be a tribute to the small number of men and women who are in the prison system and survive it, maintaining their humanity. How do you maintain your humanity? Can we change our asterisk by changing the way we allow people to die when they are in the care of the government? I believe that yes, we can. My research has shown that by teaching people how to care for each other, inmate violence statistics decrease, employee turnover in prisons decreases, and the cost of prison health care decreases. Teaching people the concept of compassion profoundly changes them. There are those people who would say, they took a life. Why should theirs be made better? I certainly feel compassion for those people who have been touched by violence. But would you want to be judged by the one worst thing that you did on the very worst day of your life for the rest of your life? The provision of hospice is different in the non-incarceration world than it is in the incarcerated world. Inmates care for each other. This becomes more important because many inmates are abandoned by their families after a while in prison. This makes their prison family that much more important, and it becomes compassion to each other. Before we go, I would like to share with you one final story. It is that of James and Robert. It's one of the most powerful things I have ever witnessed in prison hospice. James was a black man. He had served most of his adult life in prison. After being diagnosed with terminal cancer, he was put into the prison hospice program and given an inmate volunteer, Robert. Robert was also doing life and was slightly younger than James. Robert was in prison for crimes he committed as a white supremacist. Tattooed on his knuckles were the words, "White Power." At the time of James's death, Robert was called in to sit with him. There I watched him with his white power hands gently wipe the brow of a black man. Racism had ceased to exist. It was just Robert and his friend James. Robert took James's hand, and he brushed the tears falling down his face as he bent down and whispered to him, "It's okay, my friend. Go home in love." James passed away that night, and Robert learned that death has no prejudice, and human compassion has no bounds. So now, again, I challenge you. Think about your compassion asterisk. Who are the exceptions to your rule? If there's anything that I wish you to take from this TEDx talk today, I hope it's this. No one deserves to die alone, and everyone deserves compassion, even within the asterisk.